Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Lately, I've noticed a pretty obvious pattern in my compositions. Looking back at my old work, I realized so many of my pieces are centered. The character is always right in the middle. The light is focused right in the center. It's almost become a default setting for me. I guess it comes down to my own aesthetic preference. I've always been drawn to Rembrandt lighting. There's something about that dramatic contrast cutting across the subject that instantly grabs your attention. Over time, I naturally started tracing that same effect in my own work. But recently, I've realized that repeating the same composition and lighting can make things feel a bit stagnant. So this time, I want to consciously step out of my comfort zone. Also, a lot of you have been curious about what my prep work looks like before I actually start coloring. So today, I wanted to take you through the process of how a piece goes from a rough idea to the final sketch. Usually, before diving into the actual painting, I'll do a few quick thumbnails. They don't need to be detailed at all. They're just a way to test out different possibilities. I'll experiment with character placement, lighting directions, and the relationship between the foreground, midground, and background. Sometimes a thumbnail looks pretty good on its own, like this one here. But looking closer, it's just another centered composition. Nope, can't do that. Since the goal today is to try something new, I want more variation in where the character sits, creating a visual pause that feels more dynamic. Other times, I might expand the drawing from a single detail that sparks inspiration. Maybe a character's pose, or the way a beam of light hits a surface. These scattered ideas slowly piece themselves together into a full picture. For this piece, instead of focusing the light in one single spot, I want to scatter it across different areas. In a dark environment, having these faint lines echo each other can gently guide your eyes across the canvas. In the end, I went with this layout. I'm hoping that by shifting the character and light sources, and playing with the angle of the trees in the background, I can break away from my reliance on centered framing. Next, I'll start working on a full-scale sketch. This is where I lock down the subject placement, the light and shadow, and the overall mood. I actually love this stage. You don't have to worry about clean lines or precise details. You can just be bold with loose strokes and heavy blocks of value. It's all about emotion, rhythm, and atmosphere. Honestly, sometimes a rough sketch captures your initial spark much better than the finished piece. Now it's time to transfer the sketch onto watercolor paper. There are plenty of ways to do this. Transfer paper, light boxes, projectors, or even digital software. I've tried pretty much all of them. Since today's layout isn't super complex, I'm just going with transfer paper. Some artists prefer scanning their sketches into Photoshop or iPad to clean up the line art before printing it onto the paper. At the end of the day, whatever tool you use is just a means to get you smoothly into the next phase. Just pick whatever works best for you. Once the transfer is done, I keep refining the pencil line work on the watercolor paper. This is probably the part you see most often in my videos. Doing it this way keeps the paper relatively clean and minimizes eraser marks, setting up a solid foundation for the colors later on. And that's pretty much how a piece goes from a concept to a finished sketch. After finishing the pencil work, I sometimes scan it to test color schemes on my iPad. It gives me a bit more confidence before I actually lay down the gouache. Now, let's move on to the second half of this painting's journey. This time, I want to draw some little creatures, kind of like the suit sprites from Spirited Away. Except, unlike them, these ones glow. I picture them living by a creek, much like fireflies. Normally, they're just tiny specks of light, but when they gather, they form a massive, glowing orb, floating gently through the forest. Even with all this prep work, things don't always go according to plan. Sometimes the colors don't turn out how I imagined, or the lighting doesn't quite hit the mark. But I don't mind these happy accidents. A lot of the time, the most interesting parts of a painting come from these unexpected turns. If everything went exactly as planned, creating art would just feel like repetition. That's why lately, I've been trying to bring fresh changes to my work, whether it's a different composition style or simply placing a character somewhere I wouldn't normally pick. These experiments don't always pan out, but each attempt brings me closer to understanding what I truly want to create. So here is the finished piece. To be honest, it didn't fully meet my expectations. I feel like the sense of space could be handled better, and the composition still needs some tweaking. But I'm not disappointed, because this time around, I have a much clearer idea of where the issues lie and where I need to explore next. And to me, that's probably more important than creating a flawless painting. Thank you so much for painting with me today and for tagging along through all the experimenting, tweaking, and learning. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!